What's up, guys? John Shookman here. So excited to have you with me for today's video and excited to jump into it and excited to really share with you the moment where I knew I had to be on social media. I had to be sharing stories and how I realized I didn't have to compete with these massive real estate teams. And I'll never forget the experience with my client. I had just gotten into real estate. Actually, they weren't a client, and they said to me, they've said, I felt like I was just on a conveyor belt. And that sentence changed everything for me. In my first year of real estate, I'm competing with these massive teams. They've got teams with 50 agents, $5 postcards being sent to every house in the neighborhood when a house sells, billboards, commercials, even Barbara Corcoran endorsements. And I'll be honest, I thought to myself, I can't compete with this. I can't. But then came this moment, this one moment, this breakthrough where I realized what money can't buy is genuine care, compassion, and relationships. And we're going to talk about it today. And so that's when I decided to go all in on social media because social media can let me amplify relationships in a way that being on a big team couldn't. So let me bring you back to the story. It was my neighbor at on Glenmore Circle in Lancaster. They were going through a tough divorce and I knew they were going to sell. And they said to me, they knew I was a newer agent, but they said, "Hey, you sound like you're going to work hard. We will list with you." And then came a moment where I saw another team's sign in the yard. And I was getting in my inbox, my mailbox, the postcards that go in every single mailbox when a house is listed. I remember feeling anger, discouragement, doubt, and just feeling like I wasn't going to make it. They had told me they would list, and I was pumped, right? It's finally my chance. And as I drove past their house and parked, I saw the sign. And so here is what I want you to understand. So when I asked them, I just said to her, the wife, I just said, "Hey, you know, tell me what happened. You said you were going to list with me." And they said, "Hey, we ended up listing the house with Charles." Now, what you need to understand is Charles is not his real name, but he owns a massive team in the Lancaster area. And Charles has 50 agents. And every time they sold a house, they send a $5 postcard to every single house in the neighborhood. And I thought to myself, wow, Charles got that listing. How can I compete with that? I was broke. I couldn't afford those postcards, let alone commercials, billboards, Barbara Corcoran, all the things. So I remember feeling like frustrated and remember feeling like, well, if this is the way it's going to be, how can I ever be a realtor? How can I have success? And so I just kind of like sort of sulked for a few weeks. And thought, I don't know how I'm going to survive in this business. Remember, as we've shared, right, we had a young child. So this was probably like that fall. We've got a 1 month old or 2 month old or whatever it was. And I was very frustrated. But then, as the transaction went on, and I'll just say, like, it was with Charles, this big team, and the listing agent, again, not real names, was Matt, who was actually a friend of mine. And so I wasn't trying to criticize them at all. But then this moment was worth more than $1 million because of how it impacted my business. As the transaction was going along, I wasn't trying to obviously like get them to cancel their contract or anything like that. I just said, "How's it going with Charles and their team?" And this is the moment. She said, "John, if I'd had known that I would only see Charles at the first meeting, I would have never listed with him. I would have listed with you. I felt like I was on a conveyor belt." And she said, "I listed with Charles because I went to high school with him, thought we had a good relationship, and then only saw him one time." And that's when it hit me. I couldn't compete with their budget, but I actually can and could compete with the experience. So people don't want to feel like they're on a conveyor belt like this seller did. They want to feel cared for. They want relationships. And that was the exact moment that I realized that relationships, not ads, not billboards, not Barbara Corcoran, would build my competitive edge, right? And so here's the deal, guys. Money can buy ads, but it cannot build genuine relationships. That seller taught me about my unique value proposition, and everyone has one and everyone needs one. Jesse Cole always says, whatever is normal, do the exact opposite. In my market, what was normal is people getting lost in the machine, right? Feeling like they're on a conveyor belt, right? They had Charles, the agent they met with. They had Matt, the listing agent. They had Sarah, the transaction coordinator, that as soon as Matt had it signed and sealed and under contract, Sarah handled everything. And so I learned in that. And I just want to say, first of all, that is not bad. Those teams that have that set up and buy Zillow leads and all that, for them, it works. And I don't want to criticize it. But for me, the individual agent, and for you watching this, the individual agent, you cannot beat them with the ad spend or Barbara Corcoran or all those things. What you can beat them is pretty simple. You be human, you build relationships, you have a great personality, and you don't put people on a conveyor belt. Even to this day, even as an icon agent at eXp Realty in my business, no one goes on a conveyor belt. I don't have a transaction coordinator because I want all of the contact to go through me. And so when I realized this, when I realized that I just had to be human, personal, build relationships, social media became that amplifier. Social media became that way to show people my heart, my care, my authenticity. And that breakthrough moment showed me that I didn't need to be Charles or any other massive team leader. I needed to be John. And being John myself really taught me how to grow my business. And so that's a lesson. That was a lesson for me that I still carry with me to this day. And for you, your competitive edge isn't going to be money. You cannot compete with these teams with hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on ads. It's not going to be postcards. It's not going to be Zillow leads. Your edge and my edge were relationships. And if I could figure out how to scale relationships and treat people the best, I would win. And that's why I leaned into social media, because social media lets me build trust at a large scale. One post could create a personal connection with hundreds of people at once, right? And here is what everyone needs to understand. Here's what all the realtors out there need to know. People don't want to be on a conveyor belt. They don't want to be just another transaction. They want to feel cared for. They want to feel like their story matters. And so that client, even though I never got the business, it changed everything for me. And here's the cool part, a couple cool parts. Number one, the person who bought that home, I then sold that home a couple months ago for them. And what did I do? I built relationships. I genuinely cared about them and I really served their needs. They actually were 7,000 miles away. So I had to work through, how do I genuinely care and serve their needs, whether it's they're living in the house and they're 5 minutes away, when I'm doing showings, or 7,000 miles away. Now, here's the deal. I'm busier now than I ever have been. I have more clients, my membership, downline of almost 50 agents, podcasts, even this YouTube channel, but I still treat every client with the same level of care that I promised back then. That is my unique value proposition, your UVP. And every realtor watching this needs to have one. Again, Jesse Cole says, whatever is normal, do the opposite. So in my market and many of yours, it's billboards, cold calls, mass mailers. My opposite, personal relationships, telling stories, authenticity on social media and in real life. Social media lets you scale relationships. What I love about it is even people that I have not talked to in 5, 10, 15, 20 years can scroll my profile and feel like they know me. They see my face, they see my family, they see my values, and they see my business, and that builds trust. All of it builds trust. And so it's all about treating people the right way. And here's another thing I want to point out as we close out. I believe genuinely that relationships win. Agents that have join me because of the relationship that I create. Pastor and speaker Andy Stanley once said, do for one what you wish you could do for all. And when you do this, when you treat people this way, they feel valued. Jesse Cole and this fan of bananas, they've grown so much now, but they used to make a phone call every year to people that bought tickets or merchandise. Imagine if we did that with our real estate clients. They sell to hundreds, if not thousands, maybe even millions of people, and they were making those calls. Are we doing that for the 10 or 20 or 30 or maybe even 50 people that we help a year to buy a house? Are we doing that? And that's where you build trust by checking in on them and building relationships. And so that moment from that seller, first like the frustration of not getting the deal, but then coming back to it and realizing and her saying, John, if I would have known that I would only see the team leader at that first meeting, Charles, right? Or if I knew that I was going to feel like I was on a conveyor belt, I would have never listed with them. I would have listed with you. So that's my unique value proposition that now when I go to sellers and they're like, well, we're thinking about listing with Charles' team or you, I can share this story. And it is all about building relationships. And so that was that breakthrough moment for me and why I chose relationships and building relationships on social media over trying to compete with these big real estate teams. Because if I'm honest, I'm not trying to be cocky, but they can't compete with me. They can't compete with me and the care and compassion and service I give to others. So if you can focus on that, don't try to compete with the big teams. In fact, become the person the big teams cannot compete with because they cannot give your clients the care, compassion, and genuine relationships that you can. So thanks so much for watching. Appreciate you guys so much. Hope you have an awesome day, and we will see you on our next video.